I had them on line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them on line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Poe believed in me, pull up, threw some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for their prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the leaders he was planning. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. Boy, that flight to Amsterdam. Well, my accountant and minus my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in this alone. What Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in. Recorded a whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose and try the facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds. Enough faith for us all, I'm the one for the job. Most days, catching sun rays, baby, look like the front page. Overthinking what they might say.
Greetings, everybody. This is Jackie Lukman.
And I'm Uncle Baba Lukman.
And welcome to another edition of Lukman Nation with our monthly episode of Imprints of Imperialism here in Black Power Media.
It is still the most dangerous show on social media, on the most dangerous platform on social media.
Absolutely. And we got just a jam-packed show for you all tonight. We absolutely do have Milton Alamadi of Black Star News in the house. We will bring him on in just a few minutes, but we gotta get to some first housekeeping stuff. I don't know why we always forget this, because we just want to talk to the people. We're just really bad at the housekeeping stuff, but we do have to get to the housekeeping stuff. If you are not a member of Black Power Media, please become a member. Subscribe at least. As you're watching this video, like the video, share. You can find Black Power Media on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Patreon. You can become a patron of Black Power Media at patreon.com/Black Power Media.
That's right. Dope Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to say something about the, about, as you call it, the housekeeping stuff and everything. Some people get annoyed sometimes because we talk about joining, becoming Patreon and all this other kind of stuff. Hey, look, if it doesn't apply, let it fly. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, let's be for real though. We're trying to expand. We're trying to, we're trying to make this platform better.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that, if we could just do it on our looks, it would be fine.
It would,
but we can't,
I don't know.
But they're not accepting that. But before we go in, who we got in the chat?
So in the chat we have Salafu Sese Mac, what's going on, brother?
Man. Okay.
David Silberg, what's going on? C. Celestin, good to see you.
Right there, C. Celestin.
Chaotic Goods,
Yeah.
good to see you. Big Teal, Deborah Rodriguez, Ricky Ryan, hey fam, Neil Sanger, Arif Hassan, and let me go all the way back up to the top so I don't miss anybody. Leah Boggs, Jabarion M. And yeah, that's everyone so far. So welcome, fam. Thank you for enjoying your Dope Friday date night with the Lukmans, Auntie and Uncle Lukman.
Yeah, I'm feeling a little down today though. I don't know if y'all out there feeling my vibe, but we lost DMX today, and even though we kind of knew it was coming. Mm-hmm. Because all of the reports, the around the clock reports and all the news that we were getting, like last week, you might as well say.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we kind of knew that this day was coming, but it's still, like, for me anyway, like, it didn't really prepare me. Like, I wasn't prepared still, even though logically I was telling myself, I don't think S coming back from this. Like, I don't think S is coming back from this. When they started talking about, no brain activity,
right,
life support,
right.
I mean, look, you and I and been in situations like that with people we know and love, and so we kind of seen what the outcome would be, but it still was like, man, I mean, like, X was such a definitive part of just not minds, but like a lot of people's, like a lot of our, like, growing up, man, like he was like a very, like, significant part of hip hop to me,
Yeah, I mean, it was weird because today at work on the show on By Any Means Necessary, Sean was talking about the host of By Any Means Necessary, Sean Blackman, was talking about how he was like 9 or 10 when DMX came out with it's what is it? It's Dark and Hell is Hot,
right,
in '98. And I was like 20.
I was 22.
Yeah, I was like 20, 21 years old.
I was 22.
And I mean, like, that, his music was like at the foundation almost of like the soundtrack for my 20s.
Right.
Like a whole decade, like the whole what do you call it? The whole evolution of DMX from, like, Get At Me Dog, come on, man. I mean, like, Rough Riders Anthem, and the Belly soundtrack, the movie, what was it?
Romeo Must Die.
No,
I think was he in that, or I was some with Aaliyah.
Yeah, it was some other movie with Aaliyah that I actually didn't like, so I don't remember that one all that well. What's My Name? What's the other? Oh, Party Up. How could that was the anthem? That was the party anthem off of. And then there was X. And then I really liked the way he was honest about his struggles with addiction, his childhood trauma, his family issues, and just. And it just raises this whole issue, I think, that we don't like to talk about, that we're getting better at talking about among us, but that we're still not good with talking about it. We're still not comfortable with talking about addiction. Romeo Must Die. You were right.
Right.
Yeah. We're still not comfortable not only talking about addiction, we're not comfortable being decent. We're not comfortable not demonizing people who suffer from addiction, Black folks. And we're still not comfortable talking about mental health and trauma when it comes to Black men.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're more comfortable with it when it's women, but we still have this weird kind of mental, I don't know what it is, where we think that these issues don't apply to Black men. And DMX, who's, if his born name was Earl Simmons, he struggled with those things. And you just Google his name and watch some of his interviews where he talked very honestly about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And he struggled with these issues, the addictions and the trauma and the mental issues. And I mean, it's so sad that the addiction, that he finally he succumbed to his addiction. But I feel like his death makes me more vigilant to advocate for the mental health and the medical health of Black men. Because I mean, it's just, I mean, this, if you listen to the chronology of his music, you see how this brother changed and grew and how he was struggling with these issues, but through it all, he found and stuck to faith.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was just a real sad day, to hear that. You're right. We knew it was coming, but it's like, man, And I just can't help but think of all the men, all the brothers, all the black men, all the young brothers struggling under the weight of all of these things, who didn't have the outlet DMX had, who didn't have the resources that he had to get treatment, to get, therapy.
Right.
And we just got to do better, y'all. We just got to do better. So rest in peace. Rest in power, Earl Simmons, DMX.
Well, you know what, and you're right about everything you said. But when I say that DMX was a very important part, there's a part that a lot of people don't want to talk about that DMX meant. If you did time during the 90s.
Oh, yeah. Come on now.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that DMX. If you did time, if you was in the state pen during the 90s like I was, or you did any kind of time during the 90s when DMX came out, his voice was the soundtrack of your workout.
Oh, man. Wow, really?
You could not go in any prison yard, at least not in New Jersey, when where I was at, and not hear, like DMX, man. Like that was the soundtrack.
Man.
And see, one of the most important things is that DMX expressed a part of our manhood that previously wasn't being expressed. What I mean by that is that prior to DMX, you had the what I would call the gangster rap, which expressed one side. Then you had the Conscious Brothers,
right?
Like the Public Enemies and all them. You had that. You had sort of like your but the KRS ones and all them, and they were all cool. Different facets. But it seemed like DMX, man, like he combined all of them for us. Like like this was during the crack era. Let's face this.
Right. Come on, let's be real with it.
This was during the crack era, man, where things were just hectic. You heard that in his voice.
Yeah.
You heard that in the way he expressed himself. His rapping style was what we was living at that time.
Yeah.
His rapping style was that chaoticness of the crack era. His the way that he expressed it, it was all of that. It was that hyper masculinity that came with the drug game. It was all of this stuff. It was, he talked about the robbing. He talked about the, like you said, the addiction part. Talked about the sense of camaraderie that a lot of that formed during the drug era. When you had drug crews, you had either you was out there hustling, so you had your drug crew, but you also had those who was out there robbing, and so you had that kind of loyalty too. So you had a lot of stuff that he expect. If I sound like kind of hype about, because see, there's I heard a lot of people talk about DMX that since he passed, and no offense, they hitting all of the points that you hit, but they're not hitting this, but they leaving out the brothers that was behind the wall and all that stuff. They got hope from DMX because he had that kind of, like when I remember when I first heard him, man, and it was like, when I first heard DMX, man, I was like in the middle of my bed, and I remember going out to the yard, and man, everybody in the yard, man, was like, yo, man, you gotta hear this cat. You got, and you just heard him all over the place.
Wow.
And so he was expressing this type of ferocity, this manhood, man, that kind of like, even when you was in a situation where you didn't have no power for real. It's just like hearing X voice, man. You felt like you could just conquer the world.
Wow.
So I want to express that because there's millions of us who gained that kind of strength off of DMX like that, because a lot of us was in there for addiction issues. A lot of us done certain things that landed us inside based upon the choices we made because of the crack era. Wow. Either you was on the selling side, or you was on the using side, or you was on the robbing side, or whatever, because the crack era replaced the economy that was taken away from us.
You better come on and preach.
You know what I'm saying? That was taken away from us. So after they took all of that stuff from us, this is what they left us with. And now that we know the complicity of the government in all of this, right? So a lot of us got caught up in that. A lot of us became victims of that. And not knowing how, and knowing like that episode of Snowfall you and I saw the other day, when the father told him, he said, "Man, we survived all this, but I don't know if we're gonna survive this."
That was so key, in that episode. I'm so glad you raised that, because looking back on that period of time, you're in the middle of it and you don't know like the the impact that it's going to have, but you know that it is nothing that you've ever seen before. And now, of course, you know, on the other side of it, now I understand the terror that my mom and my aunt had, you know, raising us in a neighborhood that completely changed in a way that they had never seen. But what the father said in that episode of Snowfall was absolutely it. Exactly. It's like, we've survived the Middle Passage, we've survived the transatlantic slave trade, we've survived slavery, we've survived Jim Crow, we've survived all these other things. But as crack is exploding and his own son was involved in it, he's seeing the fallout of it. And he's like, I don't know if we can survive this. And from somebody from your perspective, who was inside the wall, in the midst of it, it had to feel like that.
I was a victim of the mass incarceration stage. And I wasn't innocent, so let me get that clear.
Okay,
I ain't I'm nobody's martyr or nothing. I deserve, I did what I did, and then, and I deserved to get, and I got what I got. So I'm definitely nobody's martyr, but at the same point, is that you had guys in there who, if you look back right now, these are the guys they're trying to release now because they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Right.
And so you in there and you're surrounded by all of these young black men. I was in my 20s, my early 20s and stuff when I first got, incarcerated. So, all of us, you had all of this young, virile black manhood that's in there. And this phenomenon of the crack epidemic, being victimized because there wasn't no compassionate response to us.
Right.
There was no no matter what side of the fence you was on, there was no compassionate response to us. Nobody wasn't trying to understand where we was coming from. Right. They wasn't trying to understand what made us make the choices that we made or what contributed to the choices that we made. Nobody. It was all we got was you jokers are criminals, or you junkies, or you crackheads, or you this. You're a scourge of the neighborhood, and all of this kind of stuff, right? And maybe there was some truth in that. But at the same time, what I'm saying is, getting back to DMX, it was like, like he came at that time. And he came at that time, man, where, he was like, yeah, man, this dude, he made it, he made a lot of us who were struggling with where to go and who we are. A generation of men growing up without fathers, no mentors, just feeling like we just out there. And you heard that, you listen to his lyrics and the camaraderie of the Rough Riders and where my dogs at. For real, most of us were looking for that kind of connection. We were looking for that kind of connection for somebody to have our back, because so many of us was out there just by ourselves. You know what I mean? So many of us were just out there, man, having to look over your shoulder or by yourself or don't know which way that you want to turn. So here's a guy, man, who went to prison, who had his own struggles like us, who was able to articulate that. He wasn't no college guy playing gangster.
Right.
A lot of these hip hop artists were doing. He wasn't no guy that got, that had a psychology degree pretending that he grew up in the projects and all that stuff. This dude lived this. Yeah. And so his authenticity came through to us. And so, just like I think somebody in the chat says something about how we ridiculed Whitney Houston and we shouldn't have did that.
Right.
But, and we know all the ridicule that X got with his drug addiction and stuff. But you know what? But the thing of it is that behind all of that stuff was real pain. It was real pain with Whitney. It was real pain with Marvin Gaye. Let's go back. We always had this problem. And I think, Jackie, one of the things I will end with this is that when we went on our Twitter account, and one of the things that I said in the Twitter is that, we have to, as a people, we got to set some standards. Now this is just coming from me, but we got to set some standards, man. I think for too long we allowed people to get rich off of our pain. I think we've allowed people too long. We allowed so long for people, man, to get famous and rich and gain all of this notoriety, man, after not just off of our pain, but selling us self-destructive vices that is just no good for us. You know what I mean? And I don't want to get in specifics, man, but I think folks out there know what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? That the fact that we allow people who don't look like us to promote this to us,
right,
to our kids, and you know, and then want to label that as black culture. That ain't no damn black culture. You know, that is not no black culture. For us to go around talking about killing each other, and for us to talk about this, degrading black women and all this other kind of stuff, to have somebody who don't look like us decide that, yeah, this is black culture without no input from us, and knowing the rich history and legacy we come from, to want to say, no, this is who you are.
Right, right.
So I don't know, man.
No, you're right. I mean, and people get what you're saying, because Salafu Mack said they're weaponizing hip hop against us, and that's absolutely true. So
exactly.
You know what DMX was talking about, and I can't help but think of the song and the video "Who We Be."
Yeah, oh my God, it's one of my joints there.
That's all of that. Everything that he just said was it. When you watch that video, when you listen to that song, who we be, that was DMX grappling with all of that and trying to remind himself and remind us through his art who we be.
Yeah. And
look, we're not just talking about this as an issue of entertainment, because you know what we just talked about with capitalism weaponizing our own art form that we created.
Right.
Against us. I mean, once again, the CDC, they ain't got no skin in the game. They got a bunch of white scientists and doctors up in that joint, making studies and all this kind of stuff. The CDC agrees with us that these issues of racism that pervade everything in our life, from employment, education, finance, even entertainment. Right. The CDC has now declared racism a public health crisis. So, I look at the death of DMX as certainly, yes, it's a substance abuse issue. It is a trauma issue. It's a mental health issue, but it's all a result of this ecosystem of racism and white supremacy that we live in this capitalist country, that we also see our brothers and sisters living in around the world under imperialism. It's all the same. It's all the same system.
And don't they, Jackie? Getting back to the point that you just mentioned, which I don't want us to go past there without mentioning this point. The fact that they already recognize that, because they say that with the opioid crisis.
They do.
Did you and I not read an article some months ago? We even did a show on that, where they even in the newspaper they even wrote a story on why the young why opioid addiction is such a problem, and they listed the systemic problems of why these young white people are succumbing to opioid addiction. Right. So so when we talk about Whitney and we talk about this, those who study addiction already tell you from the door that the actual drug use itself is only a symptom of what's a lot deeper inside. Yeah. So it ain't about the drug issue. Really, the drug issue is what we see. What we don't see is what's driving the drug issue.
Exactly. And they hit everything on the head when it came to white people and opioid addiction. It was a lack of blue collar jobs. It was the lack of opportunities. It was poverty, and they made perfect sense for white people. But for some reason it didn't make sense for black people, and it's because of racism. And not the CDC, I'm sorry, the American Public Health Association is where this article is from. They have declared racism a public health crisis. And this is driven by local and state leaders across the country who are individually in their states looking at the legacy of racism in their states and seeing the damages that have been caused to Black communities and Black people because of that history of racism. And they're finally fessing up to, oh shit, we have really screwed all these people over. And I really do believe a part of that effort was hastened by the uprising in the streets last summer around the country. Yeah. One of the largest demonstrations in the world. And we've had conversations about the organization Black Lives Matter, but that mobilization in the streets last summer, I think that scared a whole lot of white people across this country
right,
into, okay, we got to do something different. Now, this does not mean that they're going to dismantle capitalism and, repudiate imperialism.
Not yet. Anyway.
No, that's why we're here.
Not yet.
That's why we're here. But what they have done is go a step or two farther than they have before in being upfront about naming racism as a problem, coming to terms, some kind of terms, with the racist history of their states and cities and towns, and making some kind of effort to, at the very least, make these public issues. And I think this is where local and grassroots organizing comes in, and we see how effective that can be in addressing some of these issues. But listen, these things are not unique to us here in this country, like we just said. And here's I'm going to drop the link to this article in the chat for you all, so you can have it and peruse it at your leisure. But like I said, these issues are not unique to us here in the United States or the United Snakes. It's all connected to imperialism, because when we look at our brothers and sisters around the world, especially on the continent, it's the same system that's doing the same thing to our brothers and sisters there. So we are very, very happy to be joined tonight for our second episode of Imprint of Imperialism. Brother Milton Alamadi, the publisher of Black Star News. Milton, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, comrades. I learned so much just listening to your conversation. Thank you for that as well.
Well, we are glad. You just
no, I particularly like one thing caught my attention that you said. When you said the crack era took away the economy from us. And that's precisely what's been happening historically, globally, on a world scale. So in Africa, imperialism has taken away the economy. And that's why we see a lot of these conflicts that are going on today, including some of the ones that we're going to get to discuss. Because when young people have no opportunities, no sources of income, when you see young Africans willing to drown to cross the Mediterranean, to go to Europe in order to clean toilets and work in kitchens and work in farms as enslaved labor on those farms, then you know there's a problem. And yet at the same time, you have all these multinational corporations sucking up resources from the continent at the same time. So how can there be poverty and wealth at the same time? Just something is not adding up, right?
That's right.
When you said that, it hit me that, that's the perfect explanation for what's going on in the continent as well.
See, when we tell you these things are connected, y'all, we're not kidding. We're not the only ones who recognize these connections. So we have to continue raising these issues. And Milton, one of the ways that the United States is continuing to suck resources out of countries on the continent is this gambit that they have, in which they're pushing some countries that they claim are responsible for terrorist acts against U.S. embassies and soldiers to compensate the U.S. for those acts. And I'm talking about just recently, the U.S. received a payment of more than $300 million from Sudan. It was $335 million to be exact, to compensate victims of attacks on 2 American embassies and the USS Cole, as well as the killing of a U.S. diplomat. This was an announcement. The new head of the imperialist Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, the imperialist agency of the United States, said this was this was a few weeks ago. He made this announcement.
Right.
Now, for some context, I have a hard time remembering dates, Milton.
I think the bombing was in 1998. Is that right?
Yeah, so the bombing was in 1998.
Right.
That, for context, that was the year DMX's first album came out, y'all.
Interesting.
And the bombing of the U.S. coal was in 2000.
Right.
The killing of a U.S. aid employee, John Granville, that's who the U.S. diplomat was that they were referring to, was in 2008. Milton, this looks, feels, smells like a shakedown to me. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, there are many ways to analyze this, but ultimately the key thing is to get control over Sudan, of course. So, regardless that, during that period, we had, for the last 30 years until he was overthrown 2 years ago, Omar Bashir as the military ruler in the Sudan. So he was overthrown, and now suddenly you have this development. This development could have occurred, obviously, at any time prior to that period. It's not like the U.S. does not deal with countries that have unsavory rulers, but you have to look at the complete context. It wasn't just pay us this money, and I don't think we should even get into the details of was Sudan really involved in those the bombings of the embassies and the other attack. That's a different story altogether. What we are looking at right now is what is occurring right now. So it wasn't just that you pay us this $335 or so million, and then everything is fine. No, it's you pay us the $335 million, and you also normalize relations with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you're going to have access to up to $1 billion every year from the World Bank.
Wow.
So this, you can actually see this as, what the World Bank has, it's called structural adjustment, right?
Yeah.
Where you come in, you sign these loans, and you guys, you're in DC, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're right there in the belly of the beast by the World Bank headquarters.
That's right.
So they say you sign this loan agreement, and we'll give you this money. We'll give you this money, but these are the things that you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And normally they set up the economic activities that you can engage in. I see some flickering on your screen. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can still hear you. You keep
Okay,
going.
thank you. I just wanted to make sure. So number one.
It's probably the CIA. Don't worry.
So number one, as condition for these loans, you are not to subsidize education. So you find that today, if you go to the continent, you find that the standard of education has deteriorated in almost all of the countries. If you compare to some of the kind of brains that African countries were producing in the 1960s and 1970s, all that is gone. All right? You don't subsidize healthcare. So people die of the most treatable diseases.
Right.
Right? Education is off the table. You don't subsidize jobs as well. So we need you to cut down on these public employee jobs. And now you have unemployed people, you have uneducated people, and you have an unhealthy people. And then this is the most critical part.
Yes.
You are not to produce manufactured products. You are not to produce cars. You're not to produce electronic equipment like these cell phones. You're not to produce pharmaceuticals. Why? Because we want you to import that from these industrialized countries. Right. And now, adding to these conditions, the traditional conditions in the past, now you have to, they're very explicit about it. Now we want you to normalize relations with Israel, regardless of, how you feel about Israel's policies toward the Palestinians.
Right.
That's regardless. We don't care. You do that, and then you will have access to this money. So you tell me if that is not blackmail in the most explicit and blatant way. And that to me is the most interesting aspect of this whole so-called deal for the Sudan to pay the $335 million. And now let me give you one other example.
Yes, sir.
Remember the Pan Am plane that was shot down over Lockerbie.
Right.
And Muammar Gaddafi said he had no role in that in shooting down that plane.
Right.
But they told Gaddafi, if you want to normalize relations with the West, you want us to lift all those sanctions, you want us not to attack you again, you pay $1 billion compensation to the families of the victims. And it's so interesting that Al Jazeera did a very detailed investigative report that showed that Libya actually had no role in that downing down that plane.
Right.
What did Gaddafi do? He paid $1 billion because he realized that the sanctions against his country was really causing the Libyan people to suffer tremendously. So that's why he paid the $1 billion. And what happened? They ended up still attacking, destroying Libya, and killing him anyway. So I say this all to point out to people that are now in government in the Sudan, be careful, learn from history. Just because you paid that amount of money, don't think things are going to be okay going forward.
Now, Milton, I want to stay with because I'm glad that you brought up Sudan because there are two Sudans now, right? There's Sudan
Correct.
and there's South Sudan. Now, could you delve into a little bit about the exploitation that South Sudan is going through? Because if I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that South Sudan was sort of like put up like sort of like a Christian buffer against the Muslim North, but yet they haven't escaped this exploitation either. Could you just spend a little bit of time on that, please?
Yes, absolutely. As you know, during the colonial history of the Sudan under British colonialism, the British created an apartheid system by actually drawing the line and demarcating geographically that, we don't want you traveling from this part of the country to this part of the country. So essentially imposed and enforced segregation within the Sudan, discouraged the intermingling between the people of the Sudan, the ones with the African culture, and the ones that had been integrated with the Islamic culture in the northern part of the Sudan.
Right.
So that apartheid policy that the British created was what Sudan inherited at the time of its independence in 1956, 57. And the country really never recovered from that history. And the discrimination was very devious and malicious. So for example, and I forget the exact statistics, so I'm going to just hazard a number.
Okay.
So for example, when you had the public service employees, let's say there were about 800 total. This is during the colonial administration, right on the eve of independence. Only about 4 or 5 of them were from the southern part of Sudan, when it was still one country at that time.
Right.
And you had the army. Almost all the commanders were from the northern part of the Sudan with the Islamic, tradition and influence. So this was a ticking time bomb just waiting to happen. And sure enough, just a few short years after the independence, the civil war erupted between the northern part and the southern part of the Sudan, all predicated over superficial, what I really call nonsense.
Right.
You're killing each other over religions that are very recent.
Right.
No,
Exactly.
honestly, if you look at it at the historical context, you know, Christianity, Islam, these are very recent religions.
Yes.
And yet you're killing your brothers and sisters for what purpose, really? Something that is very superficial and actually very artificial. So eventually, it caused so much bloodshed and destruction that the international community decided that yes, let's support the partition of the Sudan into two separate countries. So now you have Sudan with the capital in Khartoum, and you have the separate nation of South Sudan with the capital in Juba. Okay, so now you have the separate Sudan. And immediately after it won its independence, you have this neo-colonial agent of the West, General Yoweri Museveni, the dictator of Uganda, started moving into South Sudan and causing conflict. So in 2013, there was some political dispute between President Salva Kiir and his vice president, Riek Machar. And all the regional countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, they all wanted to negotiate a settlement so that things would not escalate between Salva Kiir and the vice president, Riek Machar. But what did this U.S. Puppet do? He actually sent his army December 2013 into South Sudan to take sides in this conflict, took the side of President Salva Kiir. And since then, South Sudan has really been in a total inferno. But at the same time that this conflict is going on, there are major oil companies, signing oil deals with the government in South Sudan, going through Uganda at the same time. And obviously, the women, the men, the children are the ones that bear the brunt of this crisis. They pay with their blood. Well, at the end of the day, somebody's hoping to make a lot of money out of this conflict.
Milton, you mentioned about Israel, and I thought that the irony there is the fact that Jackie had mentioned, and before we go into that, as you see, we're having a little problems with our visual, but the audio was fine. So
yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, good. So anyway, it's funny that you mentioned Israel because, as Jackie mentioned earlier about the claim of the USS Cole, and that some of the payment was supposed to be for that alleged transgression. But what about the USS Liberty that we know that Israel attacked and that the United States government still, and we're not going to spend time on it, but I just thought that it was kind of...
No, of course, I agree with you. It's all, of course, selective enforcement of international law. So you invoke international law and the UN Security Council to go and destroy Libya, when Israel ignores and defies United Nations resolutions, there's no consequences to that. So we all know about that double standard. But, at the end of the day, we are going to complain about it and talk about it. At the end of the day, the solution is really up to us.
Yes.
When the Sister Jackie is saying we need to come together within our communities here in the United States, we need to do the same thing in Africa. If you don't want somebody to take advantage of your riches, then it's up to you to get your act together at the same time.
Now, Milton, let's talk about something that kind of troubled me. It's been in the news for quite some time, and I would love for you to give some context to this. There's now Sisi of Egypt had given an ultimatum about the Blue Nile Dam.
Right.
And as we know that there's been some issues with the way that I believe that Ethiopia is involved and Egypt and I believe other countries are involved.
Right.
With the scarcity of the water sources. So could you give us a little history on that, please?
Okay, very good. Of course, Egypt is the Nile, but the Nile is not only Egypt's. The Nile belongs to the entire continent. In fact, the Nile originates partly in Uganda and partly in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is saying, okay, we want to build a dam and harness some of this awesome, powerful waters of the Nile
Right.
to generate more energy, more hydroelectric energy to fulfill our vision to industrialize Ethiopia. And obviously, I think Ethiopia has the right to do that. But obviously, Ethiopia also has to take into consideration the fact that the waters do flow through Egypt as well. And
Right.
Egypt also depends on that. But Egypt should not be dictating the terms.
Is that what they're doing?
Yeah,
Is that what
Egypt
they're
should
doing?
recognize that, listen, yes, we need the Nile. We have a right to the Nile, and I'm sure there are international laws that govern that. But Egypt should also be aware that the Nile does originate in Ethiopia and Uganda at the same time. I think they should probably have a greater say in how the energy from the Nile is used. But obviously, Egypt sees itself as having a bigger military. Egypt sees itself as seeing a closer U.S. client state with billions of dollars in financial and military assistance every year from the United States. But at the same time, I'm sure Egypt is aware that Ethiopia is no pushover either. Ethiopia has one of the most effective armed forces on the African continent. And Ethiopians have a tradition of fighting in invasions. Ethiopia was the only African country that was not colonized.
That's right.
Egypt was colonized. So Egypt should not forget that. Egypt was colonized by the British, by the French. Ethiopia, the Italians invaded in 1896. And I want to interject after I say the statement, I'm going to add something else. And they were defeated. An army commanded by 5 European generals. The commander-in-chief, Baratieri, promised King Umberto that I'm going to come back with the Ethiopian Emperor Menelik in a cage so we can put him on display in the zoo in Rome. Ethiopia killed 2 of those generals, captured one of them, captured 3,000 European Italians, and turned them into enslaved employees in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has that history of resisting invasion. I'm sure Egypt is aware of that and should keep that in mind. And I say all this to suggest that at the end of the day, this thing is not going to be resolved by military force. So Egypt is hoping or thinking it can intimidate Ethiopia into just submitting. That's not going to happen.
Now, how much of this? Because I'm glad you mentioned about the client status, or the client's status that Egypt sees itself with the United States, because the United States has gotten involved in this too. I believe by sanctioning Ethiopia or placing some kind of economic,
there's some kind of economic penalties on the country if they don't, do what the West wants them to do as far as this, dam negotiation is concerned.
So you don't feel, Milton, that this will devolve into a regional war?
If it does, it would be very tragic, not only for these 2 countries, but for the entire region, because Sudan would become involved, Somalia would become involved. It would spill, obviously, into South Sudan, meaning Uganda would become involved. Kenya would become involved. It would become tantamount to an African world war, really. Wow. So at the end of my mind, this is one thing. The West do not mind conflict in Africa, so long as it can be contained. A total conflagration, that it means you can't be sucking up any resources, you see?
Right.
So that's the one thing that keeps me hopeful. Yes, they don't mind if, millions of people are dying in Africa, so long as it's contained.
Right.
Maybe in one country, and then in one country within one region. That's just their philosophy. That's how they've always operated, Yeah,
and they definitely capitalize off of the containment of, those conflicts, and they capitalize off of the conflicts themselves.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think one of the ways we're seeing that is in Mozambique, which, people, and I hate to say this so much, but this is why we do these shows, because people don't think much about what's going on the
right.
continent.
And before you even ask me the question, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, please.
We need to have these type of shows in Africa as well.
Oh.
And that is the saddest part.
Right.
Because most of these African countries, under the neoliberal imperial control, very few of them have this kind of media setting that we have right now.
Wow.
We critique imperialism. Most of them emulate the corporate type Western settings. So many of them want to be like a BBC or a CNN.
Wow.
Why would you want to? See, and that's part of the problem, because if we had enough of these type of outlets that you and I, we are having this conversation on, we would have a lot more level of consciousness on the motherland. And we would see a lot more progressive action to push back against this type of insidious imperialism.
Well, that sounds like something we got to work on.
Right. Well, this is the mission of Black Power Media. This is what we're trying to do. So you heard it from Milton himself. That's why we have to expand this. But go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, I mean, what is going on in Mozambique is it's horrific, it's tragic, but it's also very typical of imperialism. But this time, not just U.S. imperialism. We're talking about the Portuguese, the French, and other Western imperialists. So give us the lowdown on what's going on in Mozambique, this horrific attack in Palma, and what it all has to do with a few small oil companies.
Okay. Now, the sad thing is, to be honest with you, the reporting is not that good. So it's really hard to know who are really, these so-called, rebels or terrorists.
Right.
And I say so-called for many reasons, and I'll explain some of it. So you have this conflict going on in the Delgado region of Mozambique, in the northwest tip, on the coastline as well. Mozambique has a very long coastline. So obviously it's very difficult for a country like Mozambique to police its coastline.
Right.
It means if people want to become part of any insurgencies, they can come through land or they could come by boats on that very long coastline at any time. So the conflict has escalated between 2017 to now, and the attacks have been very horrific, where people, including young people, even children, have been beheaded. More than 2,000 people have now been killed. Hundreds of thousands displaced from their homes, having to abandon their farms and to hide in the forest or go to refugee centers. The typical horrendous conflict in an African setting,
right,
where the main perpetrators and the victims are also, Africans. But then I look carefully and I start asking some questions to myself. I say, why is this conflict happening in this particular region and not any other part of Mozambique? Why is it happening in the place where France is investing $30 billion for natural gas in Mozambique? And other Western countries are becoming involved as well. If they're putting 30, in fact, if you put the cumulative total of all the projected investments by Western companies, the total is about $120 billion. That's how much they're going to invest into extracting the natural gas. So if you're investing 120 billion, it means the value of the resources, let's say it's 10 times more that. Okay. Right. So we are talking about trillions of dollars worth of resources in Mozambique. So am I willing to accept that it's a coincidence that the conflict is occurring at that particular part? I highly doubt it. All right, so who could be behind this? Are these young people, young Africans in Mozambique who are saying, no way, we're not going to allow this resource to be exploited. So that's why we're taking up arms? Or is it because the foreign companies that want to mine those resources want to clear that zone of its inhabitants? Perhaps the resources extend beyond just the offshore, and the resources on the land itself that is currently inhabited by the people of Mozambique. And obviously it would be very inconvenient to have people living on land that may contain a lot of resources that these Western companies want. And is the government of Mozambique also involved in this? Could they also have an interest in having people displaced from that part of the land? And this is not something that you have to be like very big on quote unquote conspiracy to start thinking in that way. You ask yourself, why is President Filipe Nyusi of Mozambique calling for intervention to come from the United States, to come from Portugal, the former colonial power that Mozambique defeated on the battlefield in 1975 in order to win its independence? Portugal has the most horrific history of colonialism in Africa, committed some of the worst atrocities. And now they're coming back to police the peace in Mozambique and also inviting the other NATO countries, when in fact the Southern African Development Community countries, they in fact intervened in the 1970s to restore peace in Mozambique. Why are you not going to that? Why are you not saying, okay, even if those countries, Zimbabwe, Zambia, South Africa, Botswana, Tanzania, Congo, even if all these countries cannot afford to intervene, if these Western countries are so willing to intervene with their own soldiers, why don't you have them use that money to have fellow African countries come to help restore peace in your country? So that is why I'm very suspicious about the elements of this conflict in Mozambique. And also look at the history of the conflict in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the conflict that has claimed more than 6 million lives. And in that conflict, people are also talking about, look at this tribal war going on in Eastern Congo. There was no such thing. It was absolute nonsense. This was Western companies that financed Uganda and Rwanda and had them intervene with their own army. And they actually provoked this massive war. But at the same time that this war was going on for years and years and years, Western corporations were sucking minerals out of the Congo. And I always want to remind people, go to the website of the Friends of the Congo, and they have a lot of information about this. So is something similar to what happened in Congo going on in Mozambique? It's very possible. And as I said, the reporting is not that good. I need to do a lot of more reporting of my own, but what I've seen, I'm not seeing much. But that was also the case in the Congo until we started doing detailed reporting and then started naming names, including the companies that are involved in I call it a manufactured genocide, manufactured war, a genocide of profit in the Congo. So we might have another genocide of profit in Mozambique as well. Knowing the history, I'm not willing to accept that, this is just a domestic conflict that, Western countries that love Africa so much suddenly want to go and put an end to this conflict. That's nonsense. That just doesn't fly the smell test. It doesn't pass the smell.
And yet, Milton, we're being told over here that no, it's not none of those things you mentioned, but it's ISIL.
It's ISIS.
Yeah, it's ISIS. Now, now this is the same news. ISIS supposed to have been defeated, but now ISIS is supposed to be every destabilization that's happening in every African country. It's ISIS now.
Right, but I thought they were defeated. How'd they end up in Mozambique?
Right, it's too convenient. And this whole ISIS narrative keeps about when the U.S. said that the leader of they say they call themselves Al Shabaab, and they say this is because the people in that part of the country are referring to them as Al Shabaab. So I don't know if that is indeed the official name of the group, because as you know, there's an Al Shabaab in Somalia as well.
Yes.
So I found that also very convenient, that declaration that they're Al Shabaab. And then I find the beheading that is going on also very conveniently orchestrated. When you put 50 people in a stadium and you execute them by beheading, of course it's horrific, and of course it happened. But is there a design behind it? Why is it so similar to the ones that was happening a lot in Syria? Remember when we used to see on the corporate media almost on a daily basis the beheadings in Syria?
Yeah.
What happened to those? Why did they suddenly just disappear?
Right. Did they not like that?
Even if you defeated most of them, why did they suddenly stop beheading people?
Exactly.
Why is the beheading now happening at a certain time in Mozambique? And they had no history or tradition of doing that, even when they were fighting against Portuguese colonialism. That was not part of the narrative. In fact, then they had the reactionary army called Renamo, the counter-revolutionaries, who are like Mozambique's version of the Contras. And they were financed by the CIA and South Africa in the 1970s to destabilize Mozambique. And the war was horrific. They did some of the most horrific things, Renamo. But Renamo was not renowned for beheading people at that time. So where is this new element coming into the equation from in Mozambique? So there are really many things that need to be, we need to be properly analyzed and critiqued. And as I said, the sad thing is that we don't have a very good independent reporting in many of these African countries. So sometimes you find Africans that are covering events, incidents occurring in their countries, are quoting the BBC or quoting the New York Times.
Right.
It's very tragic. I mean, I laugh not because it's funny. I laugh just because it just lets you know how horrific the challenges that we are facing.
Yeah, just the absurdity and the all-encompassing nature of the misinformation and the propaganda of the imperialist state is. It's just pervasive.
Right. One other thing, I just read actually shortly before I came on the show that the French company wants a 25-mile zone to be established over the region where it's mining the resources. How convenient. How convenient is that? So now you're going to displace people away and operate that 25-mile zone. And, am I willing to just think that, okay, that 25-mile zone came about after this conflict erupted? Or was this 25-mile zone part of the planning from the get-go? And how do you justify that 25-mile zone? Well, might you not be able to justify that if there's a conflict that's going on? I'm telling you, the elements, they're just too many convenient elements.
Too many elements, and as several people in the chat have said, we're asking the right questions at least.
Well, before we move on, Jack, with the next story, you guys got to get them lights up, man. Because I'm over here watching these. Like Brother Milton said, they're not even talking about this on the continent. And we're talking about it over here for free.
For free.
Yeah, so come on, man. At least get those likes up.
At least for $4.99 a month, you could be a member of Black Power Media. Goodness gracious.
So get those likes up, because everything that happens over there, man, involves us. And I don't know why so many of us think that it doesn't, but it involves us. So Jackie, what's the next story?
Yeah, so before we go on to the next story, Milton, Pushing for Change has a question for you. Do you know the journalist in Angola that was consistently being thrown in jail? There hasn't been any news about that journalist for a while. So are you familiar with that journalist and that story, and what are the updates?
Yes, I forget his full name. I think part of his name is Morales. He's and hopefully we can look him up before the end of the show. He's a very courageous uh, journalist who has put his life on the line many times. All the changes, positive changes that we have seen in Angola, he played a part in that by his exposés, exposing corruption, being arrested, being tried many times. He was the one who was exposing these stories, smuggling diamonds by government officials. He would expose this story, and he became so renowned as a people's journalist that it became too difficult for the government to eliminate him. Otherwise, they would have killed him a long time ago. But now, but obviously, you still want to make sure he's safe because these governments, they're not incapable of arranging mysterious accidents and all that. Mm. But yes, he's a journalist that I respect tremendously, and I'm happy I had an occasion to meet him when he came to the United States a couple of years ago, actually many years ago. I think he was going to get an award from the Committee to Protect Journalists or some other organization. Yes, maybe we haven't heard about him as much as we used to, because now there's a relatively new government in Angola, and they've been fighting against the corruption. Maybe not as much as they could do, but a lot more than ever happened. They went after the family of the former president himself. His daughter, who was the multi-billionaire. And obviously,
the richest woman in Africa or something.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
She didn't make her money by coming up with a new app or, some computer programming, So obviously, those were state resources. And now the government that succeeded her father's, Dos Santos, has been, clawing back some of that ill-gotten wealth.
That is good to hear, actually, about the trying to do something with the Dos Santos family there. That's
right.
Really.
So I'm glad that the person asked that question, because that goes back to showing you that with effective journalism, much can be accomplished in African countries.
That's wonderful. And hey, we have a new member, Gerardo Velez. Thank you and welcome. We appreciate you. Welcome to the Black Power Media family. And we don't have a horn like Dear Doctor does. So we can just welcome you and thank you. So look, we've been hating on Portugal and France, so let's keep hating on France.
Yes.
Because when we talk about imperialism, Milton, in the U.S., and I think this is a mistake the left makes a lot. We talk about U.S. imperialism,
yes,
and we leave out all of the other imperialists
correct,
that are just as complicit in the carving up and the blood-soaked legacy on the continent. France is one of those countries. What is France doing in Mali with this airstrike that the United Nations said killed 19 civilians, but France has said, no, we did not kill 19 civilians. No. Why are they doing airstrikes in Mali in the first place?
Okay, very good. I think they're doing airstrikes to justify the fact that they have an army based there in Mali and based in the other neo-colonial African countries. So that is the reason for that airstrike. Most of those countries, more so than even the former British colonies, are provinces of France. They call themselves independent, but they're only nominally independent. But now we're seeing some of the changes. The younger generation, they're not having it anymore. So we saw in Senegal, for example, there's been a lot of protests by young folks coming out because they want to end this neo-colonial relationship between their countries and France. They are pushing back on the currency, for example, that was pegged to the French franc, and I believe they're on the process of trying to decolonize that currency now. And in Mali, we saw there was a popular uprising that was building up that could have actually been almost like a revolution. But then 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, the army intervened and they overthrew the president in Mali, if you remember. Now, here's the most interesting thing about that so-called military coup.
Mm-hmm.
In any of those countries, France can reverse a military coup, just by one statement. Mm-hmm. We want you to go back into the barracks. Right. And that would be the end of it. Right? Right? France is the one that is fighting the insurgency in one part of Mali. It's not the Malian army. It is the French Air Force, really. So who is really governing Mali? Of course, there are nominal Africans who are the official rulers of Mali. But the effective ruler of Mali and a couple of other African countries is France. You see? So France did not tell that coup to stand down, which means France approved of that coup.
Right.
Which, to me, I'm willing to go further and say if there's adequate reporting, you'll find that that was probably a French instigated coup. France has no beef with Mali's military because Mali's military is just a subset of the French military, right? It's trained by France, equipped by France, controlled by France. But France would have issues with a popular revolution in Mali, which is exactly what was going on about 2 years ago with the civil organization leaders coming out, with the trade union leaders coming out, with the religious leaders coming out. Mm-hmm. Those were the folks who are at the forefront of the protests that were going on at that time in Mali, right before the military stepped in. Mm. So that is the issue of what's going on in Mali. And I think that probably just is a stopgap measure because when the people really want change, they will have it, So this military, I see this military regime as a transition, just trying to delay something that the military does not fear as much as the French, fear as much. And people need to understand that without the resources from Africa, and I hate using the word third world, but France would be a so-called third world country. Mm-hmm. Let's take its energy consumption, for example. 3/4 of the energy that France generates and consumes is nuclear, correct? It's nuclear energy. Mm-hmm. And where does that uranium come from? It comes from Africa. Mm-hmm. So without access to that, where would France be? It would have to pay. It would have to pay market price for petroleum, for gas, and for the uranium.
Right. That's right.
Meaning the African countries where the uranium comes from, those would be developed countries as well. If they were getting the market price for the uranium, they're subsidizing the high living standard of France to the detriment of their own citizens,
Yeah, and I was looking for this comment from Boscore777 a little bit earlier up, where they say Europe pays for its social democracies with African blood.
Absolutely.
Is that an accurate statement that, these European countries like France, where we celebrate and we're in solidarity with workers who are rising up against the neoliberal Macron government that's trying to scale back worker pensions and, make the work week longer and, generally screw workers over. But at the same time, I mean, is it true that their social democracy is basically undergirded by African blood? And what does that mean when we are in solidarity with French workers? but it's the French government that is raping Africa and exploiting African people. Help me with this.
No. You raised a pertinent question that Nkrumah actually addressed as well in Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, the book that I always highly recommend. And he said, I'm trying to see how I can phrase it. He said, at one time, the working class in the colonial powers were allies, of people that were in the colonies fighting for their liberation. They could sympathize and empathize and have solidarity with them. Mm-hmm. But then at some stage, the governments in the metropolitan countries, in the industrialized countries, they bought off the working class in those countries. So that now, yes, we're extracting surplus from these countries, but you get a part of it anyway. Right. So why should you be in solidarity with the working class in those countries? Which is really tragic and should not be the case, because so long as you allow one part of the globe to be exploited, it means you yourself will also be exploited relatively in your own country. So the money should not be sucked from people who already have been trampled on for so long. The resources should come from those who have been sucking and hiding off trillions of dollars into offshore accounts. I think we should devote probably one future show just to looking into that alone. Trillions of dollars just sitting hidden around the world that has been sucked from these regions, including African countries, that could actually finance development, not only in African countries, but even in these European countries who have issues, So the Africans are not really your enemies. They should be your allies.
Right.
So that's how I would argue it to working class people in the developed countries,
Well, Milton, we have we're running short of time, but I would like to get into this. Tanzania's new president.
Yes.
And before we get into that, you always hear this criticism, Jackie, about Africa, relationship with women on the continent. And I'm sure that there's issues, but Africa has always been progressive. When, we're celebrating Kamala Harris over here. Kamala Harris.
Because it's the first time it's ever. Right. Well, some people will celebrate.
But I'm just saying,
right.
But female leadership in Africa is nothing new,
Right.
As a state.
Right.
Milton, so Tanzania's been having a problem since the old president had passed away from COVID, the denier of COVID.
Right. Wasn't he the one who instituted a period of public prayer to pray COVID away?
Right. Yes, he did. He did.
See how that worked out.
Right. So what you think? So first of all, Milton, what's her resume? Number one, and number two, what is expected of her, and what kind of changes you think she can bring to the country?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think it's tremendous. It's very welcome to see a woman as president in Tanzania. We need to have more women presidents in Africa. Women were in leadership historically. Yes, there are issues of relations between men and women on the African continent, just as we have in the Western countries, and a lot of it was also because of the disruption that occurred during the colonial regime, where the African tradition of women having major roles, including in leadership, was disrupted when the Euro model of the dominant male was really superimposed, to the extent that in places where women had been in traditional leadership, they were marginalized. Nobody should forget that when we look at Ghana, for example, the queen mothers were some of the most powerful women in Ghana historically, in Ashanti. And let's not forget soldiers like Asantewa, who said, if the men are not going to fight the British, give me the rifle and the brave men come with me. Let's not forget that when the Ethiopians defeated the Italians, the queen, the Empress Tetu, was fighting alongside her husband, commanding 6,000 men under her command. Let's not forget the queen, Nzinga, in the Congo. So women have always been there. It's just the disruption of the history that took us away. Now, what will she accomplish? I think the good thing is that Tanzania actually has a system. Tanzania is one of the most stable countries in Africa. A lot of it is due to the founding president of Tanzania, the late Julius Nyerere, who introduced the policy of ujamaa, socialism in Tanzania. He made sure that from the get-go, we're talking the 1960s, regardless of what Tanzanian language you speak, what part of the country you come from, we want you, if you're going to be campaigning, to campaign in Kiswahili. So everybody had to learn Kiswahili in the schools. So that became a very unifying language. That's why Tanzania is one of the most cohesive countries on the continent. I went to high school in Tanzania. I didn't know that Tanzania had different ethnic groups, the so-called tribes. That's another word that I don't like anyway. But because everybody spoke Swahili. I didn't know that if you came from another part. It was only much later that I realized, like, wait. So in addition to Swahili, there are other languages as well. So, and I saw this to say that it has a stable system where the party normally sets the agenda and the president implements the agenda. So for that reason, I think if she continues, especially, obviously I would like her not to continue with the approach to the pandemic, COVID, but I would like her to continue with the economic approach, because it's so tragic that he took that position when it came to COVID, the pandemic. But when it came to the economy, he's being praised throughout Africa right now in terms of fighting corruption, in terms of taking control of the country's resources. I'll give you one example. There was a gold company mining resources in Tanzania. And then he had, accountants and other forensic people look into, all the systems and the paperwork and all that, and realized the company had intentionally undervalued the value of the resources that it had been extracting all this time. He fined that company, I think it was something like $5 billion. But they settled on $300 million. And the company has already paid $100 million. Now, you don't pay $100 million if there was nothing wrong.
Right.
It was right. And this is the other thing he did. He discouraged the export of raw materials from Tanzania that have not yet been processed. He said, we want you to process it within Tanzania. You're creating jobs for Tanzanians and you're adding value, because ultimately I want to industrialize and manufacture these stuff that we import, manufactured in Tanzania. Right. And then the final thing that he did, he said, because in the past, these companies, whenever there was a dispute, they would run to arbitration, and it would be in London or be in New York. Right. He said, from now on, if there's any dispute, we are going to use Tanzanian courts to adjudicate. Okay. And then two other good things I want to mention. 3, he built roads, massive building of roads all over the country. He built bridges. He built a new railway, something that had not been done in a long time in Tanzania. So his legacy, unfortunately, many are going to be focusing on the tragic approach he had over COVID, but in the long run, he's going to be also remembered for lifting Tanzania's economy tremendously in only a period of 5 years. That's how long it was in power. So African countries have lessons to learn, at least from the economic approach that Magufuli was able to do in Tanzania.
Now, I am so glad that we are able to have his whole story told.
I am too, and because I will admit, I'd heard the way his response to COVID,
Right.
implementing I think it was 40 days of prayer,
Right.
to pray away COVID. And of course, my
Right.
red flag,
Right.
the alarms went up and
Yes.
not
And rightly so. I agree. I agree with
not
you.
the,
And let me just say one thing.
evangelical impact on Africa again.
Right. And
That
let me say one
that was
thing.
a real problem. But I appreciate
If I put myself in Magufuli's shoes, I think this is what happened. And obviously, I'm not condoning it. I think it was still wrong at the end of the day. Because first of all, you don't get this in the stories about him. You get the sense that this is some crazy lunatic.
Exactly.
But he had a master's in math, a master's in chemistry, and a PhD in chemistry. Now, how many of us can get that?
Right.
So obviously,
that's true.
Obviously, it wasn't that he didn't believe the pandemic was there. I don't buy that. That's impossible for somebody with a PhD in economics. I think this is what happened. He said, listen, all our countries have weak economies anyway. We can't afford to cut paychecks to people that aren't working like they can do in the United States or in Britain. People are going to die. There's a certain number of people that are going to die from this pandemic until the vaccine or whatever is created. At some point, this disease will be under control. Now, I have two choices. I can shut down the economy and people die and the economy collapses as well. Or I can allow the economy to continue operating and people will die, more people than die, as opposed to if I had put a lockdown. But at the end of the day, I think the trade-off is worth it. I think he made that cold-blooded calculation, to be honest with you. I think that's what happened. But it's impossible to believe that he didn't know that COVID existed. It's a guy with a PhD in economics, I'm telling you.
Yeah, that is invaluable context that we are really appreciative that you've given us. And I want to ask you about the new president, because someone in the comments said that she has ties to the World Economic Forum, and that there are fears that because people don't know what her policies are, that she might roll back some of the gains, the economic gains from the previous president.
Okay, that's possible. Okay, but there's one thing I find reassuring by the turnout for Magufuli's memorial. And everybody that was interviewed, that at least I heard the clips of the interviews, the people on the street, all of them were praising his economic accomplishments. So unless she wants to be a caretaker president, just finishing out his term, because the Constitution lets the vice president finishes the term of the person that was president. But within 4 or 5 years, if she wants to continue to be president, I'm sure she wants to live on her own legacy. And if her legacy is bringing Tanzania back into the fold of neoliberalism, that might not win her a term on her own.
Well, we'll see.
That's how I would answer that question. But the temptation, of course, is going to be there. I'm sure she's already getting calls, from the IMF and World Bank. How much do you need? How much do you need?
Well, look, we're at our time.
I know it always goes by too fast.
It's all good. I want to recommend one more book before.
Yes, please, because that's what people ask. People ask for book recommendations.
Not Yet Uhuru by Oginga Odinga. He's the father of Raila Odinga, who is a prominent political figure in Kenya, the opposition leader in Kenya. And he was a dedicated, committed Pan-Africanist and African socialist. He met Malcolm X when Malcolm visited East Africa in 1963, I believe, or 1964. 1964, I think, is when he visited Kenya and met Odinga. Odinga, he became vice president in Kenya, but he had a falling out with Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta was a complete, mesh of the Western establishment. And Odinga was actually pushing for African socialism, and the West would not have that. And they told Kenyatta, get rid of this guy. And he was dumped from the Kenyan government was arrested at some point, but released, but then became a marginalized political figure until much later, after Kenyatta's death. He was instrumental in fighting for Kenya going back to a multi-party system. So I recommend this book.
Absolutely.
Raila Oginga Odinga, Not Yet Uhuru. And Uhuru is the Kiswahili word for independence, of course, or freedom.
Right. So the first link that I put in the chat was unfortunately from Amazon. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. So I found a link to the book on Goodreads, and I hope that you can find it at another bookseller other than Amazon, because you know what they just did to the union vote in
Alabama. Yeah, I just read about it.
And we're glad that they're about to be sued, because we understand that there has been some serious shenanigans going on there. So
very good.
Yeah, Milton, we thank you so much
for
this time. And the next show, let's talk about these offshore accounts and how these corporations and people hide all this money that could end world hunger 3-4 times over, build the world's infrastructure, clothe and feed and, provide free health care and education to everyone many times over. So, in May, let's talk about that. How imperialism hides its money.
And let's also talk about, Milton, if we may, the lifestyles of the super rich in Africa.
Yes.
The problems that they cause, because
absolutely.
I film on them, Milton. And I tell you, we need to chop them. We need to chop them.
I'm up for that, for sure. I'm up for that. I posted on the chat, the private chat, the link to my African History Club Patreon.
Oh, great.
So if anybody is interested in that as well.
I am going to put that in there, posting it right into the public chat.
And I look forward to our reunion next month.
Absolutely. If the God willing and the creek don't rise, we will be back with Milton Alamati next month on Imprints of Imperialism, Part 3. Milton, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Peace and blessings.
Your input. And you as well.
Thank you.
All right, people. That was just dope. Just the information we get from Milton, the input that we get from you all, and your patience. We thank you so much. We don't know what's going on with our video today. We're gonna try to figure that out, work that out before our next show. But we got through it, and we're so thankful for this outlet for Black Power Media. We were doing our own thing, and we were going to do this anyway. So, it was going to be done anyway, but we are even more thankful that we have this outlet on Black Power Media to do this and bring this information, this really critical information about how we are connected to the continent, the people on the continent, and the struggles of the people on the continent in so many ways. Thank you, James Thompson, for the sticky $4.99.
Yes, James.
Appreciate you,
Definitely
brother.
Appreciate you.
Look, y'all, we love you here in Lukeman Nation. We hope you had a week. We know it's been a rough one. It's been a rough week for us. It's been a little bit crazy, but it's Friday. Eat you something really bad for you that's really good that you enjoy. Watch a great movie tonight. Relax and stay tuned. Oh, that's right. That's right. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. People have to get their snacks for 7 o'clock.
That's why I'm going to get my snacks.
So that you can be comfortable and get ready for the Last Dope Intellectual, Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly, at 7 p.m. right here on Black Power Media. So we're going to stop talking so we can go get our snack, get in our pajamas, and then join our girl at 7 p.m. where we are sure we will see most of you. So, look.
And also, before we go, also remember, there's a lot of content that I'm sure we're in the weekend now, so we all have a chance, including myself, to catch up on all of the great content which has already been put out on Black Power Media. So so I mean, look, there is nothing, we cannot sit here and say that we would have a boring weekend, because I mean, look, school is always open on Black Power Media, right?
Always open. Oh, okay. Just this really is the last thing. So we're building our raised garden beds, and we will very soon have part 2 of our little instructional weird video about how we built our raised garden bed and planted our little garden out front. We're calling it Revolutionary Gardening with the Luke Mons. And
Right. But that's a members only thing. So
yep, it's a patron. It's a members only thing. It's a Patreon only thing. So you can find it on LukeMonNation.com/Patreon. Patreon.com/LukeMonNation. So okay, I'm gonna stop talking.
Right. So I got one more thing. No.
Y'all have a great weekend. We appreciate you. We love you. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, and we've got to fight for it.
Rest in power, DMX.
Rest in power, my brother, and thank you for everything. Peace.
How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. Had them on long before I dial up. How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Poe believed in me, pull up, threw some bucks down. Todd told the valet, pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel